huge range of expertise. But of course, amongst that, she was the named author of the King Review from 2007-8 that looked at the opportunities for low-carbon vehicles and fuels, and amongst which so much of the government's current new initiatives in that area have been focused. So it's my real pleasure to invite Julia here today. So, without further ado, Julia, welcome, thank you very much. As I mentioned, amongst your extensive portfolio of roles, you're a member of the Climate Change Committee, which is responsible for proposing our 3-year budgets to help the UK towards its 80% carbon reduction target by 2050. What do you see, and what does the Climate Change Committee see that a decarbonised economy in 2050 is likely to look like? Are you optimistic that that very ambitious target will be met?
I'm an optimist, and I think it's a hugely challenging target, but I feel we all have to be very focused on meeting it. And I am encouraged because there is a lot of technology being developed that will help us meet it, and of course there are some lifestyle changes that will help us meet it too. I think the target is really critical. Marks and Spencers have that nice phrase, Plan A, because there is no Plan B. The Royal Society, in its recent report on geoengineering, has told us what the Plan B might look like, and indeed has encouraged us to be doing some of the early research to make sure there is one, but really wants to stay as Plan B. The geoengineering approach of mirrors in space, seeding the clouds, finding ways to take CO2 out of the atmosphere are things we need to know about, but they're not things we really want to find ourselves relying on. So the target is hugely important. I think it will be an economy where some areas, probably like farming, will never get to an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas. I mean, mainly non-CO2 but greenhouse gas emissions. Other areas like aviation, I think we're very clear already, unless there's drastic reduction in the amount of flying, aviation will not meet an 80% reduction, and the challenge has been set at getting back to 2005 levels. So we will have to have some areas of the economy which are virtually zero carbon. And I think the ones where there is opportunity are clearly power generation, where nuclear, wind, tidal, ocean current, gas and coal, carbon capture and storage are all things I think we have a very good chance of being able to do, and we need to be moving on with that faster than we are. I think in homes there is a huge challenge on insulation, on low energy equipment and lighting, heat pumps. I think energy storage in our homes, and I think that links interestingly to the electric vehicle agenda. I'm looking forward to having a stack of those used electric vehicle batteries in the back of my garage and charging them up at night when electricity will be cheap, and running my house during the day on them when electricity will be expensive. I think we're going to need to be more ingenious about how we use the resources we have, and I think that could be quite effective. And I think land transport with electric, and as we move further into the future, other ultra-low carbon vehicle technologies such as hydrogen, I think there are real opportunities there, combining that with better public transport, electrification of the railways. And I think the really important message is that it doesn't have to be a dismal place. I have been very critical of the luxury car manufacturers, and I felt that they haven't really got onto the green agenda. I think they're moving. I was hugely impressed about a month ago with BMW in Munich, where they were talking about their electric vehicle project beyond the electric Mini. It's called Project I, and they're doing it under the banner of joy is future-proof. And they have this lovely data coming back from their electric Mini trials going on in Berlin, where they've got electric Mini drivers comparing they're comparing their behaviour with normal Mini drivers and with BMW 1 Series drivers. They're finding the electric Mini drivers behave exactly as their counterparts in the other small vehicles. They drive exactly the average, across the group, exactly the average daily distance, which is just under 40 kilometres per day. They've said only 4% of their journeys have been messed up because of the state of charge in the car. They only charge their cars on average once every 3 days. They got over range anxiety quite quickly, and almost half of them say the electric Mini is more fun than their normal car and they feel less guilty. The future is exciting. It can be low carbon and we're going to enjoy it.
I think that's a really important message, actually, because so often we hear about the doom and gloom of climate change without actually recognising the opportunities which are out there to make for a better quality of life, for choosing low carbon options, and indeed for a cheaper life by the fuel that we're saving. You've highlighted their BMW and particularly their new e-Mini programme. BMW have actually made more dramatic reductions in their new car fleet emissions than almost any other company. Really staggering progress, and not the company you would naturally expect to have done it, and they have, by rolling out technologies across the board. You see a big role for electric vehicles, and they certainly see a big role for electric vehicles in the future. But the cost and performance of batteries is currently quite prohibitive, and the range won't appeal to most drivers. So how do you see that changing in the future if we're going to move across to more of a market for electric?
Well, we looked in the last report of the Committee on Climate Change, our October 2009 report. We looked in some detail at battery prices and the predictions for where they would go once we had the economy of scale, the reductions from mass production that the automotive industry is absolutely world-class at. And looking not only at what the mass production benefit of that might be, but actually trying to look at the real kind of absolute cost as far as we could at every element of the battery. And the conclusions were that we could see 70% reduction in battery costs being realistic. And indeed, I think our Chinese colleagues are getting very much onto that agenda already, and may well be actually some way down that path. So I'm very pleased to see that our government has recognised through the 230 million that the Office of Low Emission Vehicles, OLEV, have to spend on the ultra low carbon vehicles subsidy, which comes in from 2011, runs to 2014, of up to £5,000 per vehicle, up to 25% of the vehicle cost for people buying these very low carbon, very new technology vehicles. As we've said on the Committee on Climate Change, we don't think it's enough. We think that will need to be a larger pot, but we do think these early adopters need to be encouraged, and that probably pitching at around 5k is about the right level to get the early adopters moving, and will start to get us onto a trajectory. We've recommended we should be aiming for something like 1.7 million electric vehicles in the UK, well, electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles in the UK by 2020. The Germans are talking about 1 million, the French are talking about a couple of million. These are the sorts of numbers that are really starting to stimulate the market and get the manufacturers really thinking about the model ranges that will supply that. So the government hasn't committed to our target, but we think we do really need to be encouraging the automotive companies to make the big investments they're going to need to make.
You're quite right in highlighting that this is very much a global phenomenon now. This is not just something that's happening in the UK, but you have really strong commitments from the US, from Japan, China, from a whole range of countries like Denmark and Israel that are investing with Project Better Place at the moment. So, and every major global manufacturer is now developing fleets of electric vehicles to bring onto the market in the next few years. So this is really going to be a major change in the future.
Can I put in a real plea though? have got to get our politicians and ministers thinking about helpful legislation. It really frustrates me to talk to colleagues in Germany who say that the German government is thinking that it will put a CO2 rating on electric vehicles related to the grid electricity carbon intensity. The French and the British governments are going to zero rate them in terms of emissions. If we can't even get a consistent picture in Europe to give our manufacturers a chance to target their models from across the European market, then we haven't got much chance of getting some global standards, because actually they need to be able to address global markets, not just local markets. And when you look across Europe for petrol and diesel vehicles, RVD bands for the different emissions vehicles don't correspond to the French treatment, don't correspond to the German treatment. How do we expect a manufacturer to decide whether a 135 gram per kilometre vehicle is the right or 142 grams per kilometre? It should be a no-brainer for our politicians to get together and agree a set of common regulations for Europe and then try and get that accepted on a global stage. We really have got to help manufacturers and indeed the public address this issue by making it simple and making the signals clear and consistent.
You're absolutely right. This is clearly going to be a global market. Global standards are really going to help the manufacturers in moving forward. Within your King Review report from a couple of years ago, one of the other things you did very strongly was to highlight the really tremendous range of technologies that can be brought to bear to improve the efficiency of current petrol and diesel engine vehicles. And whilst we are seeing more of those vehicles being supplied and more of them being bought, they still don't really appeal to most of the mainstream car buying public. Do you think the incentives are good enough to encourage people to choose more fuel-efficient vehicles? What more would you like to see happening?
You're absolutely right. I mean, if we say there might be, this ambitious target of 1.7 million electric vehicles by 2020, that would only be 5% of the UK's car stock. So it will be making, by 2020, a very, very small contribution to emissions reduction. 95% of vehicles will be what we might call conventional, and if we can reduce their emissions, that will make, in the up to 2030, that will be what reduces CO2 emissions from automotive predominantly. So it is hugely important. We mustn't lose track of it, and we must find ways of encouraging manufacturers and consumers towards each other to buy these vehicles. I think the vehicle excise duty, in fact, that's come in on the 1st of April, which now takes essentially with the showroom tax and the vehicle excise duty above 225 grams per kilometre, you're going to be hit with £950, and below 100 you're going to be hit with nothing. I think that's good. It's a good message. We're also introducing that now for second-hand cars for the first time. So if you're buying a new car, this is now a serious impact on your second-hand value of the emissions. And since something like half of new car sales in the UK are fleet sales, fleet economics have second-hand price as a really important element. They may not, to those of us who buy our cars as individuals, we tend not to think too much about the future, but it's a real issue for fleet sales. So actually I think the second-hand market is an important lever, and it's good to see that come in. I think the signals still need to be stronger. I would very much like to have seen the European targets, regulatory targets, coming in earlier, but I am glad to see we've got 95 grams per kilometre being discussed for 2020, because we do need these long-term signals. So those are beginning to be very positive, and we're beginning to see them changing the industry. We had the announcement last week of Daimler-Benz getting together with Renault Nissan, recognising small car is going to be king. We've got BMW really addressing the luxury small car market now. And the recession and increasing fuel prices have given us a real boost in the UK. We we've been reducing new car CO2 emissions up to 2008 by something like 1 to 2% a year. In 2008 they dropped over 4%. In 2009 they dropped 5.6%. We've got to capture that. People have started to recognise the benefits. They're starting to think about buying smaller cars. In fact, the only two categories of cars that increased sales last year were Mini and Super Mini. All of the medium and large and luxury cars dropped. So we've started to move the consumer, and I think it's making sure those small cars are front. I think it's also adding to the labelling on absolute CO2 performance, something that enables the consumer to see that whether or not they're buying best in class. So it pushes people much harder to best in class. The message is not entirely important to compromise. We do want, whatever you need for your requirements, we do want to make sure you find the best, because that will push manufacturers. So I think we're starting to do the right things. We have, with the help of the recession and the increase of fuel price, started to see consumers changing. We've started to see the automotive companies recognising that's the direction things are going. We've got to do things to help keep that momentum. So I would like to see, given that we're not going to have very much money as we deal with national debt right across the developed countries, I would like to see more action from local authorities on free parking for very low emission vehicles, use of bus lanes for very low emission vehicles. There's lots of evidence that shows that we, as the drivers, overvalue being allowed to do those, to have those treats, to park by the supermarket door or whatever it is. So let's use those non-monetary levers that we have, as well as the regulatory ones, to actually get consumers realising this could be more fun and could have more benefits.
I think you make a really important point, and I think a lot of people don't realise that if you buy the best in class, so the best Super Mini or even the best 4x4, the emissions will be 30% lower than the average for that sector. That's a huge cost saving, and most people simply don't realise what opportunities there are to buy the most efficient vehicles.